Hi, I'm Dave Adams, KLYC Radio, and we are broadcasting live from one of the places that I've always wanted to broadcast live from. We're in the Goose, and you can watch us online by going to KLYC Radio on Facebook or our website, klyc.us. I'm your host, Dave Adams, and this is a Live After 5. We're going to be doing some very interesting broadcasts. And one of the first, when we started thinking about doing this show, I said, we've got to do it in the Goose, right?
Of course. Best place to do it.
Now, this is Spruce Goose Bruce, and he is the expert here at the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum of all things Spruce Goose. And if you go online and look on our video feed, we're looking directly into the tail section of the Spruce Goose. So as you come and take the exhibit and tour the Spruce Goose, where we're sitting is generally where the public comes and sees. So, Bruce, this is a marvelous airplane.
It's a fantastic airplane. I call it one of the marvels of the world, truly, even today.
Marvels of the world. Tell us some of the interesting facts about the Spruce Goose.
I think probably the most interesting fact was that such a large airplane flew in such an early year of our history of flight, because no other airplane this large had ever flown. And I think this kind of introduced the larger commercial airplanes today. If this one could fly, my goodness, the 747s could fly, the A380 could fly, just had different power plants. So I think it broke a barrier, and I call it kind of the aviation industrial revolution moving forward, this aircraft.
You look at the size of this plane and you wonder how it can get off the ground, but it did. How high did it fly?
Well, everybody says about 70 feet, but really it was 25 feet off the water for about 30 seconds and less than a mile. And we have to go and follow what it says on the aircraft log book. And if you take a measurement on the thickness of the fuselage from top to bottom, that's 30 feet 5 inches. You can't find 30 feet 5 inches underneath this Spruce Goose above that water. You're going into the water. I don't care if you set the altimeter on top of the water. So that's the official flight is 25 feet off the water, 30 seconds, less than a mile. And I've talked to witnesses, and they agree with me.
It flew. It's amazing, but it did fly. Speaking of interesting questions, people from all over the world have come to tour the Spruce Goose. What are some of the most interesting questions people have asked you?
Well,
where's the bathroom?
Yeah, I think a young person came up to me one day and says, "Is this the real airplane or is this a model?" And I said, "Well, somebody's got to be awfully rich to build a model, a duplicate of the Spruce Goose." And they said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Yes." The other thing is, when we went down to a Howard Hughes former employee reunion about 3 or 4 years ago, a couple of us from the museum representing the museum, there were people down there that were former employees didn't or weren't aware that the Goose had been taken out of the dome down there and that it was in McMinnville, Oregon. That was probably the biggest astonishing thing that Alan Herkamp and I ran into. We couldn't believe they didn't know that. But
how long had it been gone and they didn't know it was missing?
Well, it moved out, of course, in 92. We finally got it on 2 barges and 18 wheelers and 38 pieces. So we're talking in October of 1992 that it actually finally moved out of the dome and toward Portland up the Pacific Ocean, those 2 barges and 18 wheelers up I-5.
I guess they didn't get the memo.
I guess they didn't. Otherwise, they were so busy maybe working for the Hughes company that they didn't go at the dome and see what was left.
So this is designated HH1, is that correct?
Well, the original designation was HK1. That was a Hughes Kaiser #1 design. But in 1944, when the contract was interrupted because they said, we're getting the subs and we don't need this aircraft anymore to fly men and equipment over the submarines, because that was the main goal of this airplane. Hughes and Kaiser went back and did some lobbying in D.C., and Franklin Delano Roosevelt heard about it, President Roosevelt, and he says, I think we should let them finish 1 airplane. So it came down to the War Production Board. They weren't going to go against the president. So what happened was then Kaiser is out, and they told him, Hughes, it's your airplane. You get the rest of the $18 million, of course. So that's when the designation changed in 1944 to the H4, which is Hughes #4 design.
Okay. Now we are looking towards, if you look in the video feed of this, we're looking into the tail section. So this back here is, if you look down to the floor, you see some kind of beach balls. Now what are the beach balls?
Well, the beach balls were found out in the pontoons of the airplane. Now, the pontoons on a flying boat keep the tips of the wings out of the water. If you don't do that, you're going to get on a water loop. Or if you're an aircraft on land, you'd get a ground loop. The tip would catch in the water and you'd crash. But they put those beach balls in there, and they're 5 sealed compartments. Now, they didn't have styrofoam in those days. So they went all over Los Angeles and found every beach ball they could find and stuck them in these compartments so that in case there was a crack or leaking water, those beach balls and would keep out the water, some of the water, and keep the pontoon floating until they got to a dock. Interesting thing about some of those beach balls, there's still air in there from 1946. Now the test question here is, why? Well, let me make the big announcement, made in USA. Why not?
So you're looking at some of those beach balls that still have some of the air from way back when.
Yes, sir. The one in the display case here has original air in it from 1946, and where you put in the air, that is sealed off with glue. We can see that, and so we're quite proud of that. Somebody told me, and this is only a rumor, they put an outsourced beach ball up against it, and it went out in 2 weeks, down in 2 weeks. I don't know about that. I didn't see it, so I was just told that's a rumor, and that's all it is.
I think you told me that this aircraft has 5 backup systems. Is it 4 backup systems? Typically an aircraft, a commercial aircraft, I could be wrong about this, but it has 3 backup systems. This one has 5. Is that correct?
This has 5 hydraulic systems on board. When it flew, it did not have that. But there are 2 on the engines. 1 and 2 are on the engines themselves, and then 3 and 4 are down here on the flight crew deck itself, and that's where the compressors are that supercharges the hydraulic system. And then number 5 is sitting to the right of the co-pilot, and that's a hand pump. And there's an amplifier, I'll call it amplifier, that goes with that amplifies that compressor. And good luck on that one, but that's the way it was set up. When he flew the original the airplane on the original flight, he didn't have all that on board. So Dave Grant was the hydraulic engineer, and he was the best that Howard Hughes could get in the United States, and he came out of Wright Pat, Dayton, Ohio, as a hydraulic engineer, and he was the one that sat in the right seat when the airplane flew, not like that weatherman in the movie The Aviator. And incidentally, Dave Grant's son was here about 4 years ago. His name is Jim Grant, and I have a picture of him I always show people and say, I got to talk to Dave Grant's son for about 3 hours and really glean him about some information of his father flying the Goose with Howard Hughes.
So when this was being built way back during the war, top secret, was it hush-hush?
Well, pretty well. Good security around. One of the interesting things was that they've said that, well, Kaiser, his engineers, and Hughes, his engineers, could combine and build the airplane. Well, in my research, I found that Hughes told Kaiser keep his engineers out of the hangars where we're building this, and that's in Building 15. They call them halls where the 2 hangars are. One hangar, they built the fuselage. The other hangar, they built the wings. And he said, you keep your engineers out of those where we're building the airplane, and we'll take care of it. Kaiser wasn't too happy about that, but anyway, there was security around it, yes.
It's not made out of spruce.
No, it's made out of birch. They said, well, where'd they get the name? Well, the hearings in 1947 about Howard Hughes, privatizing government funds or really poor control of government funds, what have you. They said the name came from the news media. My research showed up. They said the news media said, we don't have any records of that, calling it the Spruce Goose. So it might have been thrown out by a senator or somebody. There were about 7 names thrown out in this airplane. Hughes Folly, the Wooden Wonder, Hughes Fiasco, the Flying Lumber Yard, the blankety-blank airplane, the Hughes employees called it. Then Plan Corps was what the government called it.
So the Spruce Goose was derogatory, probably. It was probably an attempt to put it down.
Yeah.
Possibly?
Hercules was a name that comes up, and everybody calls it the Hercules. Well, Howard Hughes didn't like any of those names. He just called it the Hughes Flying Boat. Now, Hercules H4, that was a winning name by the employees when they had a contest. And this one gentleman won the contest with this name, and he got, I believe it was a $200 war bond for naming the Spruce Goose, or Howard Hughes airplane.
As we look behind us, if you look in the video feed, there are some red cylinders. What are those red cylinders?
Those are fire suppression bottles. They're CO2 bottles, and they put those on after the flight. There are 36 of them there. Now, down below in the bilge area, that's Navy talk, there are fuel tanks down there. Right now, there's only 8. It's designed to hold 14, but there's a ring around each fuel tank down there. Then there's approximately 4 rings around each 4360. Then there's some spread out through the wing itself, the leading edge. But that was to put out fires on the aircraft, and the flight engineer could direct that CO2 to wherever he wanted to put out a fire. But it was never put on until after the flight.
So it actually flew without a fire suppression system.
That's true. There were a couple of guys in the wings. I have the names of those people who were in the wings, and they had fire extinguishers just in case, but I don't think I'd want to be in that wing. Those engines are awfully noisy.
So somebody can actually crawl up inside the wing.
You, from the flight crew deck above us, you can walk into the wing and walk out to all 4 engines, but you can't perform much maintenance on them. Behind each engine is a 31-gallon oil tank that provides oil for the engine and also for the props. I've crawled in behind engine 5 all the way up to it, and I'll tell you what, old man shouldn't be doing that, or anybody shouldn't be doing it. It's dirty, it's messy, but I'm kind of a hands-on engineer. I got to try it. I won't do it again.
So it would be something very, very difficult to do in actual wartime to crawl up there and try to fix something.
Yes, the way they worked on the engines was there's some knobs or connectors hooking that are outside on each side of the 4360, and inside the cell there's a crank that has cable wrapped around it, and you unwind this cable and these 2 knobs come down, and then you hook onto a tubular platform with a plank on it, and that pulls up, and you crank it up next to the engine, and that's how you work on the engine over the water.
All righty. So you just kind of sit on the plank and hang it there like you're washing a window on a big building.
Exactly. Same kind of structure.
So let's look in the back of the airplane again. Now, this is the back here we're looking into essentially the storage compartment where the troops would sit. This was designed to be a troop carrier.
That's true. Now, they advertise about 700 troops. No, I have the 3 configurations that Howard Hughes had proposed for this airplane. And interesting thing, the copy of the document I got on the front cover page, it says secret. There are 3 configurations, 1 for troops, 1 for equipment, and 1 for hospital ship coming back from the war. Hughes, on this configuration for troops, was 400 troops only and not carrying a full load of fuel on board. He would take short hops. And people would say, well, how do you get from the west coast to the east coast to get over Europe? Well, let's go back. And people who have been around a few years have heard about the China Clipper. Now, that thing had been around the world several times on commercial airline flights, and it was a flying boat. Guess what? The routes were already planned, so Howard Hughes, he just could follow those routes, and with the Spruce Goose, or he's flying boats, and accomplish the same thing, so there wasn't a problem there.
So do they fly north to Greenland, or how do they? What's the route?
Well, there are several routes. You can go south, you can go north, but mainly the ones I was looking at, come out of California and head south and take some routes down there and then hop across the Panama Canal area down there and then head back up the side and go that route. There was one I think I saw going over to Hawaii, and I'm not sure if this thing would hop it to Hawaii because the range on this thing on paper is about 2,975 miles. Well, with a minimal amount of fuel he had on board, he's not going to make that hop.
It would be amazing to watch this thing fly. Have you seen the movie where they actually, I think there was a movie done, you can probably tell me the name of it, where they blow the front of the building out here and steal it and fly it away?
You know, I'm trying to think of the movie. Yes, I was here when they were doing the filming, and they had a big a green curtain hung up across the windows. And my goodness, there was more cables and semis out here in the back to do this filming. and I watched it, and it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe what they were doing to this airplane. They had the airplane starting up here inside the museum. Here the props were turning, and then all of a sudden the airplane busts out through the windows and takes off. Well, now, wait a minute. This is a seaplane, not a land plane. And one of the comments that one of the persons said, well, I don't know, they asked where so-and-so was, and he says, oh, he's hiding under the landing gear. Well, wait a minute. What landing gear? There's no landing gear on this airplane, so I don't know where they got that, but out through the glass he went, took off. They stole the airplanes, what happened, and took off on this short drive-in out here, which is kind of a runway. There's an interesting story about that, too. Somebody using their GPS in the fog coming in here one morning. But anyway, then it crashed, and they only showed a couple little pieces, and so it wasn't too much trouble.
Okay, now let's back up here. There's a story about somebody that was trying to land here on the runway in front of the museum?
Well, in the wintertime, it gets pretty foggy in here in the morning, and you can't even see the other side of the highway from here. So somebody was coming in here to go to the museum, and they were using their GPS. True story. They made the turn in here, and they started coming down this driveway coming in, and it's marked like a runway. And they were on their GPS, and they didn't see this, I guess, and they looked down at that, and the comment was, my gosh, we're on an airport runway. True story.
Okay, so next time, folks, you come by in here, it is the roadway coming to the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum, but make sure you're not on the airport runway, which is across the street.
It's across the street, and the 747s we have here and some other aircraft had landed out there. And interesting that two 747s, a Dash 100 and a Dash 200, did land out there with a little room left over. It's like the president's airplane.
With a little room left over.
With a little room left over, the president's airplane, the pilot, main chief pilot on that said, we can land on short runways. We just can't take off.
It is a one-way trip. I think our power just went off. Okay. Well, we just lost our video feed, but and I need a cup of water. Oh.
I'll shut her down.
Okay. I think we're back up here. All right, video feedback. That's what happens when you're on the air and somebody turns off the power. That's okay. So, interesting facts about the Spruce Goose. Anything more you would like to share with us?
Well, I think interesting about the Spruce Goose is that it did, I think, break some barriers, and that barrier, and that was that large airplanes can fly if you design them right, no matter how large. And we look at the 747s from the Dash 100 up to the larger ones. My gosh, they can fly, and there's another big one coming up. It's going to fly. And Howard Hughes was way ahead of his time. He was a genius, and he did make some contributions to aviation. Not a lot, but some contributions to it. But he had a pack of genius engineers around him that put up with him in the design of this thing. And so I think that was impressive to me that they could get this done and put up with Howard Hughes, too, and his weird habits. And his organizational chart was Howard Hughes, then everybody else comes up to him. There's no in-between organization. They just came to him with the questions, and that's kind of what he demanded.
So I guess with Howard Hughes, it's my way and my...
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any changes in the design and what have you had to go through him, and it might be at 2 o'clock in the morning when he'd hold a meeting, and that was his hours, and then he kind of expected those engineers to be back to work the next morning. At least that's what I read in my research. But he was a nice gentleman to his people, I've heard and read, so, I'm not trying to put him down. He just was an interesting gentleman.
Very interesting gentleman. Now, you're known as Spruce Goose Bruce. Why did you fall in love with this airplane? What attracted you to become Spruce Goose Bruce, the resident expert of the Goose?
Well, I put a career in the Air Force, United States Air Force, And then when I retired from that, I went back to grad school so I could work at university level and college level teaching some engineering. And then when I retired from that, a friend of mine from the department brought me over here and got acquainted with one of the people that worked for the museum, and they said, well, you're retired, you can come to work here as a volunteer. And I said, well, I don't know. I said, well, come and try it. So I did 15 years ago, and kind of fell in love with it because being a former college prof, you love doing research. It's interesting, and I still do research on this aircraft. Sometimes I think I know the right thing, and then I'll do some more research and find out, whoop, I think I made a mistake. But I started working on the Goose because it was interesting. The aircraft, well, being in the Air Force, the design of the aircraft, the building of the aircraft, and then Howard Hughes. And then about 7 years ago, this retired Navy captain who I work with here, he came up with the name, hey, we're going to call you Spruce Goose Bruce. And I said, what? Yeah, it rhymes, Spruce Goose Bruce. And I said, I don't know. Well, I kind of caught on, and it went along with it, so I've been Spruce Goose Bruce for about 7 years, and that's the only reason why.
So this is one of, as you put it, one of the wonders of the world, this airplane.
I think so. To me it is, just because the time they built it, how they built it out of wood, my gosh. They did have mosquito bombers and what have you, and there's other airplanes been built out of wood, but not to this magnitude. This is something else. And somebody said, well, would it fly? You think it would really fly? Well, maybe only Howard Hughes knows that. And go ahead. Somebody said, well, it's underpowered. Well, yeah, that's the rumor, and I've read that too. But, it'd be interesting to try some real flights with it, and they never got to do that.
So it only flew once slightly. It never really did what it was designed to do. Do you think it should have been built? We spent a lot of money on the airplane.
No, because, when they flew it November 2nd, 1947, let's go back 2 months to September 12th, 1947, Seattle, Washington, Boeing Field. Boeing rolled out a brand new B-47 jet bomber. So there you are. The jet age killed it. That was the end of it. That was the end
of the Goose.
Yes. And jet age took over. Howard Hughes did have a model of that on the board, but it never got any farther because he died then in 1976, April 5th. On a plane coming back from Acapulco heading for Houston.
Okay. The Spruce Goose. Here it is. How long has it been here in McMinnville?
There was a parade out here bringing the Goose up the highway on February 27, 1993, bringing the parts in from the Willamette River. Took 2.5 days to get it over here from the Willamette River to the highway, but it was February 27th, 1993, when it arrived in the area.
Now, don't start any rumors, but if the Goose had to leave here, let's say a chain of events happened, and don't read any more into this than I'm doing it, but I'm just asking a what-if scenario. If the Goose ever had to leave, I was told that they couldn't leave because the locks in which it came here have been dismantled, so there's no way for it to leave, really.
That's right. Because they had to come through the locks. The wings had to come through the locks separately. They were in tandem vertically on 2 barges, and then they pulled them apart before they went through the locks. The fuselage came through the locks. The vertical tail came through the locks. Well, with the locks closed, there's no way to get this out of here unless you totally dismantle the airplane more than it was at that time. It would be pretty tough to do that. And when we took it apart down at Long Beach, my gosh, that was, a number of pieces. But still, my gosh, a big lumber barge and another barge. One barge went into Pier 2 and the other one came into Portland, where Mayor Bud Clark on October 22nd, 1992 proclaimed Spruce Goose Day. But that was on a large barge. They went back down to Vancouver industrial site there, and that's where they took it off the main barge and put it on 3 separate barges to get through the locks. But the locks are operational. I don't know how they'd get it out of here.
It's landlocked.
I think it's a landlocked. I think we like to keep it. At least I enjoy volunteering here, and I love working in the Goose and talking about it. Sometimes my cohorts say, Excuse me, we got to go and switch off Bruce. He's really wound up and going, so.
Well, they tried to a second ago, but we turned it back on.
Yeah.
So people have come from all over the world to see the Spruce Goose. Give us some examples of some of the countries that they've come from.
Oh, my goodness. Vietnam, China, Austria, Germany, Australia, South America, Italy, Sweden. Interesting thing, one day Ernest Borgnine showed up. I was up here on the deck looking down. I said, my gosh, that looks like Ernest Borgnine. No, that's not him. And then I saw the black suiters around him. That were the guys that were in the
security
offices. And I said, nah. Then I heard him say, well, if you remember one of my movies, and I went, bingo. And I raced down there and got his autograph picture taken with him. What a nice gentleman. Another one was an American was up here, then a fellow from Vietnam. And I got to looking at them. I said, well, what's going on with those two? Come to find out, these two guys had been fighter pilots, one for America, one for North Vietnam. The North Vietnam pilot had shot down this American pilot.
The one he was talking to.
Yeah, and they were good friends. That took me back a piece.
Amazing. Any other famous people? We've talked about Ernest Borgnine. What other names can we drop here?
Well, I think, the Tuskegee Airmen coming through, and then Doolittle crew, one of the Doolittle crew.
The Doolittle Raiders.
Yeah, and one of the Raiders lived about 2 blocks from me, DeShazer, and I went to his funeral, and he was buried in Salem Cemetery, and I went to his funeral, and a B-2 bomber flew over, made one pass. That was it. That was impressive. But his home was like a museum. Oh, my goodness. But I had the pleasure of being invited to his house, and what a wonderful man. But, Tuskegee Airmen and the Doolittle Raiders, my gosh, that's makes me feel very humble when I see and meet these gentlemen.
So, folks, if you've never been inside, do you take the public up into the cockpit?
We take the public up in the cockpit on a separate tour. The reason for that is when we got this aircraft, the American Disabilities Act of 1992 was passed. Now, there's no problem with that, except it kind of, is tough to get up to that second deck. And I think when you look at the stairway to go up there, you see, well, in case of fire, and this airplane is wood and glue, you have to get the physically impaired down out of there in case of a fire, and that makes it tough. So we've kind of said, well, for additional fee, we'll take you up there on a tour. You can sit in the flight crew deck and sit in the pilot's seat and what have you. And that way we don't want to be biased. But we do have an elevator to this deck, so we can handle any physically impaired. But going up there, there is a danger in case of fire. Oh, my goodness. And if we could build an elevator going outside all the way up there, this thing is, I'm afraid, would go up pretty fast. There is a total sprinkler system around the whole thing and inside, but,
How much does this weigh, the Spruce Goose?
Well, on paper, it's 300,000 pounds. Gross takeoff weight's 400,000 pounds. I do have the official weights on it when they weighed it, and I won't quote those to you. When the airplane and Howard Hughes configurations, he set it at about 247,900 pounds, somewhere right in there. That was his estimate. And then he put in the weight of the fuel, the oil, the troops, and all the other stuff, so it had come up to 400,000 pounds gross takeoff weight.
So 400,000 pounds takeoff weight. Let's equate that to a ship. How big of a ship would that be? Like, I'm throwing out a curveball here at you.
Yeah, you are, because I'm not a Navy person.
You're Air Force.
I'm Air Force. And if our Navy man was here, he could probably give you an answer on that. I really can't say much on that because I haven't equated it to what size of ship would take this. But it'd be a very small one. My goodness, it wouldn't be very big because you're talking 100,000 pounds or a little more a cargo weight in here. That's not much for any size of ship, even a small ship that accompanies a carrier and what have you. That's not much for a ship.
All right. Closing thoughts. Spruce Goose. Obviously, it's going to stay here in McMinnville. It's McMinnville's claim to fame. One of them, we have the UFO Festival. We have the Spruce Goose. It definitely puts McMinnville on the map. Brings tourists here.
Please do. And if you come in on Wednesdays, ask for Spruce Goose Bruce, and I would be happy to talk to you and try to answer any questions about Howard Hughes or the Spruce Goose.
It is here to stay in McMinnville. At least that's what all of us hope. We're here at the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum. With me is Spruce Goose Bruce. What are the hours of the museum?
The hours are from 9 to 5 every day, 7 days a week.
Come on down. Enjoy. Thank you for being with us on Live After 5. If you have any other comments of topics that you would like us to go, maybe interesting places you'd like us to do a show from, we do live video when they don't turn the lights off, and live radio broadcast as well. Send them to Dave at klYC.us. We're going to be doing this as much as we can. And sometimes we might be inside the Goose. Who knows where we'll be next. We are going to be doing, we have some other scheduled shows that we're working on. We'll let you know as we get those dates firmed up. For now, Spruce Goose Bruce. Is Bruce your real name?
Yes, it is.
So they didn't make that up?
No, they didn't make that up.
Okay, well, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for having me on. It was an honor and a pleasure for me, too.
And I hope that you enjoyed the show. Again, you can watch it online by going to our Facebook page, KLYC Radio, and our website, klYC.us. In the future, if we do another show from the Spruce Goose, we'll have some slides that will intersperse in the broadcast, and we'll possibly take a look at the cockpit and some other things. But you can also go online to do a Google search for Spruce Goose, and I'm sure you can see the interior pictures of the aircraft. For now, have a good night. We are expected to get some weather this evening. It was starting to cool off, get a little windy outside, so might get some rain this evening. Make sure you cover your goose up. All right. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
AM 1260 KLYC. We like to say on the street, online, on the air, depend on us. And we have more to come.